We are Life Church Livonia.
Good morning, Life Church Livonia. How is everyone? Hey, I am so glad to see all of you. My name is Brian. I'm the pastor here, and if we've never had a chance to meet, I would love to meet you after the service is over, especially while we are eating hot, fresh Petey's Donuts. Is anyone else besides me excited about Petey's Donuts? I'm super excited, and I can't wait to engage. And I told them that the bounce houses that are set up there have to be pastor tested, so I'm first in line for the bounce houses when this is over, and then your kids can enjoy them, okay? I have to safety test them first, of course. It's super important. So, hey, we are in the middle of a series, and it is a great time to jump in because we are looking at different struggles that every single one of us face in our life, no matter who we are. And we're really talking about what is the pathway forward out of those struggles into something that is more life-giving, more beautiful, that allows us to be set free in a way from these struggles. And they aren't struggles that are caused by social media or technology, but they are absolutely things that social media and technology have made more difficult. And so if you are a person who uses social media all the time, if you're always on Twitter or on Instagram or on Facebook, then this message is for you. If you're a person that never goes online, this message is for you because it impacts all of our lives. And so far, we've talked about a couple of different topics. We've talked about contentment. We've talked about intimacy within our relationships, especially our friendships. Last week, Alex did an amazing job talking about authenticity and about a lot of the barriers that exist to full authenticity with people. And next week, we're going to talk about our desperate need for rest. But this week, we're going to lean in heavily to the topic of compassion. What does it look like to be a compassionate people? And honestly, I think that on the outside looking in, if you were to simply look at social media and the social media posts and the usage in the United States, you might get the idea that at least some of our country is deeply compassionate. Because you see a lot of posts, a lot of tweets, a lot of pictures, a lot of hashtags that kind of feel on the outside like compassion. But I think that as we strip those layers away and we take that veneer off of it, it actually ends up being something different. It's like a cousin to compassion, but it's not fully compassion. And what I would call that is it's actually reactivism. Reactivism. And I honestly thought I made that word up until I Googled it. And I started reading about it. And it's a real thing that reactivism is actually something that people are talking about. And I really loved what a journalist overseas, his name is Taha Ali, said about reactivism. And I'm going to read it to you, and then we're going to highlight some excerpts from that. But I just want to just tell you, it's kind of long, but this is deep, and it's hard. But I want you to hear what Taha Ali says about reactivism. He says, every time there's a national tragedy, a natural calamity like an earthquake or a flood or some human rights violation or terrorist incident, we are collectively racked by an overwhelming tidal wave of dark, seething emotion. We fixate on the human costs, the suffering, and the horror. What is painfully missing in this equation is an activism geared towards human dignity, compassion, and social justice. We don't intellectualize our anger. We don't ask hard, searching questions. There is little concept of a long-term, intelligent, and systematic engagement with core issues. Instead, we mourn for the victims in a grand, collective, highly emotional catharsis mediated by Facebook and Twitter. And then we are quick to move on to the next tragedy that comes our way. Obviously, nothing really gets fixed. This mindset becomes a type of reactivism, a counterfeit activism where we are perennially reacting to crises and never addressing their roots. We diligently change our display images on Facebook and craft emotional tweets. We blame the politicians. We blame the army. We blame foreign actors, but we never, ever really blame ourselves for not demanding accountability and hard change, for our superficial activism and our utter lack of engagement. Our entire conversation fixates on the horror, the suffering, and the sacrifices. It is the discourse of victimhood. And the fatal cost of our position is that it is actively perpetuating the status quo. hard words. The reactivism, it appears to be engaged, but it actually is disconnected. Because we are so quick to move on to the next thing. And so what I want to be really clear about is that this is going to be a hard, I think, but necessary word this morning. And that some of us in this room many of us actually, are already engaged in beautiful compassion. But my hope, my prayer is that as a church, as a people, in the community of Livonia and the surrounding communities, that we would become known as people of compassion. That we would elevate our game in this area to something that is so much more than what it has been. And that it wouldn't just stop at Life Church Livonia, but it would have ripple effects throughout all of Metro Detroit. Because what is needed isn't reactivism, it's compassion. And in its simplest form, compassion is simply a deep awareness of and sympathy for another person's suffering. At its core, it's just about me becoming aware that there's something going on in your life or in the life of a group of people that's broken and hard, and there's suffering out there, and that we have sympathy for that person's situation or that people group's situation. It's meant to be a word that has a deep personal element. It's meant to be a word that we have to engage personally. But what we have to do is allow it to move us beyond just feeling sorry for somebody to actually doing something about those feelings, to actually engage. And there is no better model for us of what it looks like to engage because of compassion than Jesus. No better model than what Jesus did as he walked on this earth and as he ministered to people for such a short time. And just 3 years of active ministry that he did on earth, we have countless examples of him engaging as a result of compassion. I want to look at one of those stories. It's in Mark chapter 1. It says this: "Now a leper came to him," meaning Jesus, "and fell to his knees asking for help. 'If you're willing, you can make me clean,' he said. And moved with compassion, Jesus stretched out his hand and he touched him, saying, 'I am willing, be clean.'" This man, this leper, that they would categorize people as lepers if they had any number of skin infirmities. But one of the things we know about people that had leprosy in that day and age is that amongst Jesus' own culture, amongst his own people group, that he would have been an outcast. Even amongst his own family members, he would have been an outcast. No one would have wanted to be near him because they were afraid they might touch him. And if you touched him, you yourself would now be unclean. And ceremonially, you would have to go through all these rituals to become clean again. And yet, so imagine the nightmare that was this man's life. Imagine what that would have been like to not even be able to be touched or hugged by your own family, by the people that you've known your entire life. And this was the guy who came to Jesus and said, "If you're willing, I know you can make me clean." And what does it say Jesus did in that moment? Did he turn to everyone that was gathered in that moment and publicly declare that he stands with people who have skin disease? Did he stop and take a quick selfie and then post it online and say, #I'm with him? Did he preach a sermon about the need to raise awareness for people with skin infirmities? And say, we really need to raise the awareness of people that have leprosy. It's a big deal to people. And they don't have friends because no, Jesus didn't do any of that. What did he do? He stopped. And he didn't just feel compassion. He was moved with compassion. And he was moved to the point that he actually touched this man. A man that potentially hadn't been touched in a long time. Jesus risked his own social status. He risked his own ceremonial cleanliness. He risked his own reputation. And he was moved by compassion. And he touched him and he changed his life by setting him free. By allowing this man to re-engage in community, to re-engage with the people around us. He was moved to action by his compassion. And our online activity after every major tragedy needs to extend to this kind of action. where it's not just filled with emotion that is divorced from action, but it's emotion that is married to action. This is what Jesus did, and this is what God is calling us to. And this is, if you're not a believer and you're here this morning, you're wondering what the church is supposed to look like, this is what the church is supposed to look like. Mobilized for action, filled with compassion that is more than just feeling sorry for people. Biblical compassion sees the problem, is moved by that need, goes out to where the problem is, and gets its hands dirty trying to help. Can you picture what this looks like? The biblical compassion, it says, I see what's going on. I see your struggle. I see your suffering. I see your pain. I see your problem. And I'm moved deeply inside of me. But more often than not, we stop right there. That's where we end it. But if we're going to live into biblical compassion, we have to move beyond that. And we have to say, okay, I'm not just going to stay here in my comfort of my own home, on my own phone, tweeting or liking or posting or whatever it is. I'm actually going to get up and go to where the problem is. And when I get there, I'm willing to actually get these hands dirty, to actually engage deeply with the people that are hurting. We see this kind of compassion over and over and over again in the life of Jesus. Just like we were just talking about in Mark chapter 1 with the leper. It's a great example of Jesus being moved by compassion and engaging the individual. We see it in Matthew 14:14. This is a moment when Jesus was supposed to be hanging out with his closest disciples. Their goal was to go away and be alone for a little while because they've been doing a ton of ministry. And he's like, why don't we go hang out just by ourselves? And I'm going to teach you, just you and me. And instead, a bunch of people follow him. And Jesus can't ignore them. He has to engage. And so he stands up and he teaches them instead. He just teaches everyone who showed up. And then on top of that, he finds out all the people are hungry. And what does he do? He's moved by compassion and he feeds 5,000 of them miraculously. It's unbelievable. We look at it in Matthew chapter 20, verse 34. And Jesus, he encounters two blind men from Jericho. And he's moved with compassion. And he ends up healing them on the spot. Because Jesus-centered compassion, it sees the need. It's moved by the need. It actually pushes us to go to where that need is, to actually physically move ourselves. And then it gets its hands dirty trying to help. And so if this is what we're called to, if this is the kind of life that is supposed to mark a Christian, then why do we struggle with it so much? What is it about our life and our culture and even our online activity that causes us to struggle so much with this? They did this study at the University of Michigan, and it spanned from 1979 to 2009. And they were studying a bunch of different things, but they surveyed over 14,000 college students during that time. 14,000. That's actually a really nice sample size to get a snapshot. And I love that it was a study at U of M because this is close to us. This is just up the road, really. And one of the things that their study showed was a sharp decline in empathy. And in that report, it says that we care 40% less than people did in the 1980s. We care 40% less than people did in the 1980s. And if you took that study and you plotted out the decline in empathy, the decline of compassion, the decline of people caring deeply for one another, and you overlaid that with the rise of social media and technology, they would perfectly match. That as technology increased and social media increased, compassion and care and empathy began to die. Why? What is it about this thing that we do with our phones or with our computer? What is it about our online presence that causes compassion to begin to die? I think there's three things. And I just want to highlight these quickly. And I don't want you to hear me say that I think all social media is bad. I think that sometimes social media does lead to compassion. Sometimes it does elevate our ability to engage. Some of it is beautiful, but there's some pitfalls here. And the first is this, is that we are more obsessed with ourselves now than we ever have been before. Did you know that 80% of social media usage is fixated on the self? 80% of social media usage fixates on me. on my life, on my kids, on my selfie, on my vacation. And we've actually come to a spot for many people who are active users that it becomes like a drug to them, because when I post something and you like it, and then your friends like it, and then they share it, and then something else happens, it actually releases chemicals in my body. We call it dopamine, and it becomes a drug that makes us feel good, and you can actually become addicted to it. And it causes us to become more obsessed with our own life and more obsessed with our own experience. It's a problem. And it's part of the issue with the decline of care, the decline of compassion. But it's not the only issue. The other thing that we see is that overwhelming exposure to suffering desensitizes us. Overwhelming exposure to all the struggles in our world, it desensitizes us to the real need that surrounds us, and sometimes blinds us to the need that's right next to us. And all you have to do is pull up social media of any kind. I dare you to flip up on Facebook, unless you have literally unfollowed any person that ever posts anything negative, which is possible. You're like, I unfollowed everyone who doesn't post pictures of cute puppies. Unless that's you, you're going to be flipping through your news feed, and it's going to be like, oh, there's a sweet recipe for guacamole. I'm definitely saving that because I'm hungry right now. And if you're like me, you save like 50 videos about food, and you only make about 1% of the recipes. And then you're just going through, and after the sweet guacamole recipe, there's a picture of a starving child in Africa, and you flip past that, and then, oh, hey, there's a cute cat video, and oh, hey, there's a fail compilation. That one's awesome. Oh, there's Bob on vacation. I wish I was on vacation right now. And then you flip more, and there's a reporter that was beheaded, and what? We flip past it over and over again, and we see these horrific things, but we've become desensitized to it. Like this overload, we can't care about everything deeply, or else we would never leave the house. So what it does is it begins to turn off the empathy inside of us in our everyday life, because the overwhelming exposure to suffering desensitizes us. In the 1980s, before this decline in compassion, it was rare that you would see things like that. You have to turn on the nightly news, and you might have something that shows up. But more often than not, the nightly news wasn't filled with suffering and struggle and pain. You might have to flip to the third page of the newspaper if you read the newspaper to read something about that. But today, it is in front of us all day, every day. And not only are we more obsessed with ourselves and becoming desensitized to suffering, but also on top of that we have distanced ourselves from the suffering. And so a lack of personal interaction makes it easier not to care. And so instead of me finding out that you lost your job in a face-to-face sit-down when you're broken over it, I hear about it because you post about it. Instead of me hearing that your grandmother passed away because you call me, and I get over to your house right away, and I lean into your life, and I'm hugging you, and we're crying together, I read about it on Twitter or on Instagram because you post a picture of you and your grandma, and you say R.I.P. to the best grandma ever. And what happens is that this lack of personal interaction makes it easier not to care because we don't engage as deeply. It is really difficult to stay removed from people's pain when you're in their pain with them. So if you wonder, how has compassion gone on a steep slide to non-existence? A big chunk of it has to do with technology and the use of social media. When we respond to these people, more often than not, we aren't practicing compassion, we're practicing reactivism. And reactivism emotes, while biblical compassion engages. Compassion isn't simply clicking. Compassion isn't simply liking someone's status or sharing someone's video. It's about caring for people more than we care about ourselves. And the more we use social media, the more our self-centeredness increases. And the longer we spend time with Jesus, the more our care for others increases. You can't help but have that happen. This is what Christians should look like. This is what the church should be about. The more time I spend with Jesus, my care for other people, my love for other people, my compassion for other people is elevated. Why? Because I'm beginning to look like him. Because that's who Jesus is. The one who loves, the one who cares, the one who stops in the middle of what he's doing to engage people who are struggling. This is what biblical, Jesus-centered compassion looks like. And I would argue that very few people outside the church or in the greater community of Metro Detroit have ever experienced this kind of compassion. They haven't received it. They haven't given it. We see this all the time, where as a church we respond. Like we hear about something that happened and we engage out of deep compassion. We're moved by our compassion. And when we show up, people are like, why are you here? Like it blows people's minds that we would show up. When I was talking to Lindsay Respondek, who helps coordinate all of our meals that we give, when people have a major event in their life, we try our best to organize meals around those and bring people food. And she tells me that a lot of times when they show up at people's homes delivering these meals, people are blown away. I get phone calls about this. I get emails about this. Like, I can't believe your church would do this for me. And it feels abnormal to them. It feels weird to them, and they love it. But this shouldn't be abnormal. This should be the norm in our communities as our hearts are filled with love and compassion for other people, and we see the need and we meet the need. This should be the norm in our life, but instead it's become foreign in our culture. So as we kind of turn that tide, as we make a decision as a church to turn that tide, and honestly, if you're not even a Christian, I'd love for you to go on this journey with us to see what it looks like, to see what it really looks like to live into the words and the life of Jesus. But you have to be ready for some changes in your life. If you're going to step in to Jesus-centered compassion, you have to be ready for some changes in your life. And the first one is this: you have to become aware that this type of compassion, this type of lifestyle will interrupt your plans. It will interrupt your plans. I know because we see it in the life of Jesus. We look at Mark chapter 6, and we see once again this moment when he was trying once again to retreat with his disciples, to have some alone time, and this huge crowd shows up, and he can't resist. He engages, he feeds them. It happened more than once in the scriptures. Mark 6 is just one of those examples. We see it in Luke chapter 8 when Jesus is on his way to heal a dying little girl. He was moved by compassion for this little girl, and he's on his way. It's an urgent mission that he's on. And on his way there, he gets stopped by a woman who has been sick for years. This woman has been bleeding for years, and he stops and he ministers to her because why? He was moved with compassion. He was moved with compassion. And the funny thing about these situations over and over again we see is that Jesus' disciples were annoyed. Deeply, they were like, what are you doing? Jesus has got things to do. We're trying to have some alone time with our brother here. And why are all these people here again? And we don't have any food to feed them. What are we supposed to do with all these people, Jesus? We don't have any money. He's like, and they're like, Jesus is on his way to go heal a girl that's dying. You're just sick. Leave him alone. He's got more important things to do. And Jesus is like, shh, I got this. I got this. I have to have this because I see her and I love her. My heart is filled with compassion for her, and I will take care of that little girl too. And he engages, and he sees them, he heals them, and he meets their need. And he's interrupted constantly. Mark chapter 2. He's hanging out in a house. He's teaching people. It's so packed, his family can't even get in. Talk about an interruption. Some dudes rip a hole in the roof of the house. It's like Jesus, your time is so important. I get that. But we're going to tear a hole in the house where you're at to drop our friend in so you can heal him. And Jesus never gets mad. Have you noticed this? The only time you see him grow indignant is when people try to prevent him from engaging the people that he has compassion for. Because the interruptions aren't unexpected. There's a part of life that Jesus embraces because this is how he loves people. If you want to have Jesus-centered compassion, you have to be ready for your life to be interrupted. And you also have to realize that it probably is going to cost you something. Jesus-centered compassion always costs us something. I love the story of the Good Samaritan that even if you've not read the Bible, you probably have at least heard about the Good Samaritan, this guy that is journeying along this road, and there's a man that's been beaten and robbed, and he's lying on the side of the road, broken and bloodied, and all these people are just passing by, but the Good Samaritan stops. And we could preach on that text all morning long. We're not going to, but what I want you to know is that guy saw the need, he met the need, and it cost him something. It cost him his potential social status because he was engaging people that were cross cultures, but it also cost him some money. Because what does he do? He picks the guy up and he takes him to a local inn and he pays for his lodging there. And the amount of money that he had to pay for that was probably about 2 days worth of wages. That movement of compassion in his life, it costs him something. And I think for us in America, especially in the suburbs, especially as we get more affluent, is that for a lot of us, money is easy to give. Like we're willing to engage in compassion if we can just give. Like I don't want to actually have a conversation with that person, but I will give online and we feel really good about it. And our giving is necessary, it's needed. I don't want you to stop giving because you should. There is a reason why we take an offering every Sunday, because it allows us to engage in the ministries that we do. So it's not that you should stop, it's that we connect our lives to people instead of just connecting our dollars with people. Compassion will always, always cost us something. And more often than not, we would rather give than our money than give our time. We'd rather give online than show up in person. Because clicking is clean, but compassion is messy. Clicking is clean, but compassion is messy. And that leads me to the final point of what it looks like to step into Jesus-centered compassion, and that it not only interrupts our time, it not only costs us something, but I am telling you that it changes lives. It changes people's lives. And more often than not, what I've seen in my life, and I wonder if this is true for you as well, that the life that's changed the most when we step out and are moved by compassion to engage people, it's not their life, it's my life. When I finally choose to live into the kind of person that Jesus calls me to be, it changes me. When I was a youth pastor, I spent a long time ministering to students that were junior high students and high school students and college students. I loved that job. It was an amazing opportunity for me to spend time with students. But it was also difficult at times, and it was most of the time the difficulty came dealing with certain tough kids. And I'll never forget, there was a student that had kind of come to our youth group a few times. He was a friend of a student that was a part of our church. And he signs up for this retreat we were going on. And whenever we would go on a retreat, whenever we would get away and go on these trips, they would always assign the students into smaller groups, right? This is a group of 7 to 8 boys that are going to be in your cabin or your whatever, your area where you're sleeping, and you're in charge of loving on them throughout the weekend, meeting their needs throughout the weekend, making sure that they don't set the cabin on fire in the evening, because boys will do that, I'm telling you. If they were junior high boys and it was a week-long trip, you were also in charge of making sure they changed their socks, because a lot of times junior high boys would go home with as many pair of clean socks as they came with, and that's disgusting, and so it's part of your job to help engage that. And so that was my job, and on one of these retreats, we got a list ahead of time, and I look down at the list of students, and I see that this guy's on my list. He's in my group. We're going to call him Mark. Mark's name was on my list, and I'm actually ashamed to tell you that when I saw his name on my list, I was instantly bummed about it. I was annoyed by it. I was like, no, anybody but him. I'll take anybody but him. Because this was a guy that was foul-mouthed. He was rude, especially to adult men. He had no respect for adult men, and he would push back, and he was abrasive and prickly all the time. Talk about hygiene issues. This guy had deeper hygiene issues than anyone that I'd ever done ministry with, to the degree that people didn't even want to ride next to him in the van on the way to the trip. It was not good. He was far from God and actually in a lot of ways was combative with Christianity. And so he would argue constantly in the small groups. He was a kid that deeply struggled. And I was deeply struggling with even wanting him to be in my group. So what did I do? I prayed. That's what we should do, right? I get on my knees and I'm saying, Lord, I need you to give me a deeper level of love and a deeper level of desire to be with this student. And what God gave me was compassion. Broke my heart for this student and called me to engage deeply. Gave me a love that I could not have mustered up on my own. Gave me the ability to let his foul mouth just run off my shoulders and his rude comments to not get me all prickled up myself. He gave me ability to then love him enough that weekend that we continued our relationship after that. And now I became that guy's ride to and from youth group. I was helping him get there even when his friend wasn't there. And then weeks down the road gave me an opportunity to sit down with him and actually teach him about hygiene. And in that conversation, he cried. He cried because no one had ever taught him that before. All he knew is that people didn't want to sit next to him, and he didn't know, he knew it was because he didn't smell good, but he didn't know how to make a difference. No one had ever taught him. God began to peel away the layers, and I began to realize why it was he struggled with adult men. It's because he had no dad in his life, and he'd been raised by a single mom that did her very, very best, but they were constantly poor and constantly moving from shelter to shelter, and he was homeless on his own as a teenage boy on the streets for a season. Of course he struggled. And God broke my heart for him. I began to see why he was so aggressive about his lack of faith in God, because he couldn't believe that a good God would let him live the life he had lived. And I'll never forget the moment when, as a result of that relationship, I'm on my knees on the hard floor of a room praying as he receives Jesus as his Lord and Savior, and his life is transformed. And it all started with a simple prayer by this guy, this cold-hearted jerk who didn't want him in my cabin in the first place. And I simply went to Jesus and I said, Jesus, this interrupts my plans for the weekend. I give you permission to change my heart. Jesus, I know this is going to cost me something. I'm willing to give whatever it costs. Jesus, I know that if I engage, there's a chance that it might change his life, and it changed mine. Because God brought me to a place of compassion for a person, and his life was changed as well as mine. And the truth is, friends, we rarely know what compassion will cost us before we actually engage it. And we can't overcalculate this. You can't step back and think it through for too long before, otherwise you just won't engage at all. We never know what it will cost us. And the steps for you and for me to engage in Jesus-centered compassion are simply exactly what I did. To first pray and say, God, give me eyes to see the people around me that desperately need my compassion. And here's the truth. Some of them might be in your family. They're the people that you are so annoyed with, so done with, that you stopped giving them compassion a decade ago. Some of them are in this room with you. And some of them you're going to meet on the side of the road. You're going to meet at your workout class. You're going to meet them in the parking lot of your child's school. They might even flip you off. True? Where are those people, Jesus? We pray. That's the first step. And then we give God permission to interrupt our plans. We give God the ownership over everything we have, including our time. And say, God, I know it's going to cost me something, but your compassion cost you more. I see, God, what you were willing to give me through Jesus, and I'm just going to give back what I have. I don't give what I don't have, I just give what I have. And it changes people's lives. The ultimate act of love and compassion came from Jesus Christ. God was moved by his love for us, moved with compassion over the brokenness in his relationship between humans and God. And he said, I'm going to fix that by sending my son, Jesus, to walk this earth, to model for us what it looks like, to engage in love and give away your life. And then I'm going to send that same man, Jesus, I'm going to send him to the cross. And he is going to take on the penalty of all of our brokenness, all of our sin, all of the things that we've screwed up in our life. And he is going to take it all because of love and compassion and a desire to mend relationship. And Jesus did it. He did it. And then he rose again. And he conquered death so that we might have life and we might have a relationship with God. Compassion. It's at the center of so many of the things that God calls us to do. And without it, we're simply robots checking off a box. Without it, we're simply people that are reacting instead of engaging. Without it, we're just people who are emoting instead of actively changing people's lives. No one can do it all. You can't engage every single cause or issue you see in your social media feed, and I'm not even asking you to do it. What I'm saying is that even though no one can do it all, we can all do something. Maybe you're sitting here today and you're the person that's desperately in need of compassion. If that's you, we can't actually engage the need unless we know the need. Please tell us. Your connection cards are a great way to do that, or our welcome desk, or you can just come find me. I had people find me after the service and let me know. I can't promise we can meet every need, but we're gonna do our best to engage in you and love you as our family. Maybe you're that person. Please tell us. Or maybe you're the person sitting here today and you know that the compassion level, your like tanks of compassion are almost dry. I want to pray in just a few moments, and I'm going to invite you into a place where you give Jesus permission to change that. Would you pray with me? God, we just so grateful, overwhelmed by your love for us, overwhelmed by the compassion that moved you to engage people, that moved you to allow your time and your agenda to be interrupted. God, we are so grateful that you showed us the way in that. Jesus, we are so grateful that you chose to come and to walk this earth, to give completely of yourself so that we might have life with you. And if you're in this room and you are far from God and you're in desperate need of his compassion, I just invite you in the quiet of your own heart to simply pray and say, Jesus, here I am. I need you. I don't even know what that looks like yet, God, but I know I need you, and I know I need your compassion, and I know I need your love. And so I just give everything I've got, all of my brokenness, all of my hopes, all my dreams, all the beautiful things about me, and all the difficult things about me. I give them all to you, trusting that you'll stop, you'll engage me, you will show me your love, because you are a God of compassion. I choose to commit my journey to you. If you're here this morning and you know your compassion levels are low, I just invite you to, in the quiet of your heart, to pray with me and just to say, Jesus, I just give you permission to interrupt my plans. That is a dangerous prayer, God, but we pray it today. We give you permission to interrupt our plans. God, we ask you that you would open our eyes to see the ones who you see, the ones you want us to engage in. God, do that for us. We ask that you would create a willingness in our heart to give even when it costs us something. And Jesus, we pray that as a result of that many people's lives would be changed in this room and beyond this room in the coming weeks. We can't wait, God, to hear the stories of what you do. Because all of this brings you glory. All of this brings you praise. All of this points back to you, the author and the creator of life, and the one who gives compassion. We love you. We commit our church and our lives to you in the name of Jesus.